Let's just start with the nail polish. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that your first social policy that you're changing in the police department? Is that the first policy you changed? Are there others that are coming?
So the nail polish thing just kind of fell in my lap. This is the third day, obviously, for me, and I've spent a lot of my time getting out and about, meeting people, because really, that's the only way you truly know how policy decisions are impacting the people that are actually doing the work. And quite honestly, I have not had any one specific thing prioritized policy-wise just yet in the third day or then the first day. But as I was walking around and I was meeting people, someone brought to my attention that for a very long time, women have been wanting to wear something other than clear fingernail polish. And obviously, I don't wear clear fingernail polish. And I said, well, something as simple as that, it's done. But what folks don't realize is that something as small and what could seem insignificant is really something large and has a larger impact. I've had a lot of people come up to me since then and say, thank you very much for doing that. I, as a leader, as a then police chief and now as a police commissioner, you'll hear me say, we are looking to not only attract and retain people who are from the community and of the community, but we have to make sure that they feel supported when they get here. So it's one thing to say, I want critical thinkers, I want people from diverse backgrounds, I want people with high emotional intelligence, I want people with different lived experiences, and then I hire them and I say, you know what, I hired you because you're you. Everything that makes you unique, all the unique things that you bring to problem solve here, we value it, and then the second you walk through this door, we say, now all that I hired you for, strip that away and you're going to be exactly like the cookie cutter police officer we expect you to be. So while the nail polish conversation I notice has kind of taken a life of its own, it really meant a lot more to a very specific group of people here and has for a very long time. So it wasn't even on my radar. Like I said, it kind of fell in my lap. And again, if there was something that I had the ability to influence in a very short period of time, in passing, why would I not do that?
Speaking of specific communities, people in the African-American community are treating you as if you had some sort of magic pixie dust sprinkled on you for reducing the homicide rate, reducing the homicide rate to see 75% of the murder victims being African-American. Do you feel as if that's too much is being placed on you in that regard, and what is your broader plan for that?
I appreciate that question because that tends to happen when there's a new person that comes in and they are hired to alleviate or fix certain problems. And I have been very quick to push back and say, one, I'm only one person. There's a lot to accomplish that cannot be done by any one person alone or any one particular organization. There are a lot of factors that lead to why we're even having the discussions that we have, whether it's around education or, I even pointed out that what we're really talking about is distribution of wealth, right? Equitable distribution of wealth. That's not something that law enforcement has a hand in. However, we have a seat at the table. And I believe it's important that with the perspective that I bring, not only do I use that seat at the table efficiently and wisely, but I bring the perspective that I have as a Black woman to make sure that I advocate on behalf of those who are not only underrepresented, regardless of what the demographic is, but to offer my perspective, my lived experience, use that to inform policy, but then also use my professional experience to bring forth what has worked and what I have seen work. So it's a little bit of both, and to your point, you're absolutely right. I think it's important to manage expectations around that because crime has been surging for the last, since 2016. This isn't something that just happened. And again, no one person, and if anybody thinks any one person has fixed anything in the past on their own, we're setting that one person up for failure.
We went back into the neighborhood where there was the shootout with police in August. We talked to a woman who was across the street from that home. And while she's praising the city for cleaning up the area and fast response, she's also the mother who's lost 2 sons to homicide. And so the first thing she said she wanted to know is, what do you do to try and get the murder rate under control? And what do you do to try and clean up the other petty crime when there is such a lack of trust between people and the police department to come forward and tell you what they're seeing?
Yeah, and you hit a really good point. We can have all the best strategies. We can enforce, we can be increasingly visible, but without community input, without community collaboration, we will not be successful, or whatever efforts we make won't be sustainable. It's important that they see us beyond our uniforms. It's important that they see us as human beings. And we have, the onus is upon us, quite frankly, to make sure that not only we create opportunities outside of enforcement actions for them to see us and get to know us, but we have to be more transparent in the information that we share. We have to be responsive. And when there are those questions, we have to answer them. I think the biggest part is what community wants. At some point, you know, we'll get the benefit of the doubt, but we have to be willing to say, you know what, I messed up. We as an organization, we failed you in this area, and I'm sorry. But here's what we're doing as a learning organization to make sure that it either doesn't happen again, or if it does, we have mechanisms in place to catch it, to make sure that there's swift consequences if it does. So a lot of what we're talking about is relationship building, and a lot of it is acknowledgement that there's a reason why the community doesn't trust the police. It's not just in Philadelphia, it's everywhere. We represent an institution that is not equitable for a lot of people. We are the entryway, we represent the front gates of the criminal justice system where we all know there are inequities. And because we are seen most often, we bear the brunt of a lot of that animosity that is there because we appear to be representing or acting as agents of what's seen as the inequitable. So knowing that for me, and when I talk about perspective, knowing that helps shapes how we do what we do and why we do what we do and why I take the time to explain what our policies and strategies will be. But I also believe that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There has to be proportionate consequences for certain crimes here, for violent crimes specifically. Does everybody need to go to jail for certain things? Absolutely not. There has to be consequences to ensure that the behavior is modified. So whatever that looks like, so it doesn't happen again, people don't recidivate, I'm all for that. But it needs to be very clear what we will and will not tolerate in this city. And it's not just, you know, from me as a law enforcement leader, but as a community. And once the community steps up, which they have, and said, we will not tolerate violent crime here, I think, you know, it will become more and more uncomfortable for many. But again, it has to be a collaborative effort.
Rising homicide rate, the Plain View project, the residue from that, lawsuits and in the department, against department. What makes Philadelphia attractive to you?
Well, you know, it's interesting. When I got here, I felt very welcomed. There's a very welcoming spirit, and I felt settled. It was just like home to me. There's a lot of good. The Philadelphia Police Department, I'll speak, you know, on behalf of for the department, it's been around for a very long time. And there's a lot of things that this department does really well. And there are also some things that we need to get our act together on. But it doesn't negate all of the wonderful things and the smart and intelligent people that do exist here that are committed to the community. I met a group of officers the other day, they're all from here. And a lot of community will tell you, we want officers that are from our community so they understand. They weren't around when you know, a lot of the things of the past occurred. They took this job because they wanted to give back, they wanted to serve, and they wanted to make sure that they did it in a way that their community knew that they were giving back as part and being from the community. And a lot of folks sometimes don't understand why the community sees them in such a negative light. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of good in the police department, there's a lot of good in the city, and I did not find it unattractive. I believe that with a lot of the issues that were presented and were on the table, I knew that I had a skill set where I can add value that would not only change things, but it would be meaningful and impactful, not just checking boxes or not just putting me, it's not plug and play, not just putting me in the seat to say I have A in this seat. I knew that I would be able to really make meaningful change, and I'm looking forward to doing that. And I have family here.
Whereabouts? You don't mind.
I'm not going to say that, but I do.
You're a hard person to find that information on online, but you know, you
That's
talk
very
about
intentional.
Kudos to you. You talk about, you know, wanting police from here. What kind of challenge does that present to you for being not from here, but this whole slate of a command staff now that you have to build? Do you pull from the department? Do you bring people in? How difficult is that in building your?
I don't see it as difficult at all because, you know, I hear, and I've pretty much lived and worked in the same community for a long time, or the same city for as long as I know. But I often hear community members say, well, they have to be from here in order to understand, and I don't necessarily agree with that, because we spend a lot of time away from, whether it's our family, loved ones, whatever it is, at work. And so you spend a lot of time here, you learn a lot about the city. And when you have the proper accountability mechanisms in place, you will quickly be able to identify who's committed to being a servant leader and who's not. So I don't necessarily agree that someone has to live here, but they have to be willing to learn about the history of the community. And it might, you know, again, there's subcultures within each, you know, within communities. You have to be willing to learn about it, understand what the cultural differences are, understand when someone responds in a certain way. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're being threatening. It means that that's how I communicate right now. I'm a little bit angry, and this is how I'm getting my message to you. As long as someone has the willingness and openness to want to learn about differences and appreciate and value differences, I'm okay with that. With all of that said, there's a lot of strong, competent people here internally. And it's just a matter of, which is what I do, making my rounds, observing, and whether people know it or not, people stand out, you know, and you can't hide who you are. There's a lot of folks who are for the status quo and might need a little bit of nudging. There are individuals who are innovators, they're problem solvers, and they don't need prodding to identify a problem and say, you know what, here's a solution, or here's what I tried and it didn't work. So we might not want to do that, but I'm going to try this again. Over time, you see how people address certain issues. So I'm really excited about the possibilities with that, and I don't see it as a challenge. It's just going to take, you know, a little bit of time, and unfortunately, at some point, I have to sleep and take some time for myself. But there's a lot to be done.
What are your feelings about focused deterrence and treating crime and homicide as a health issue? Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, so we know there's a very small percentage that's responsible for a large percentage of crime. We also know that there are small pockets within the city that drive the stats up citywide. So by focusing very intelligently through the use of data and information and through partnerships, focusing our resources on those smaller entities give us wins but larger impacts throughout the city. So one is about being smart with the resources that we have and making sure that we're not casting a wide net, and it's rather spearfishing, I like to say. But then it's also making sure, again, that consequences are proportional to whatever the crimes are. In this instance, I believe we're talking about violent crime. But once you get an opportunity, when you add the human services piece of it, you're actually speaking to people. It's not just out there enforcing, you're making an arrest, you're off to jail, and then that's it. When you add the human services element, you're actually having a conversation with offenders, and you might hear, you know what, I just needed a job, or I did this because. And we have the opportunity with our partners to say, okay, if you had this, or if I provided you this, would you stop doing? Some people say yes. And that's another way, another effective way to get them out of the life that they find themselves in. Now, again, I believe there has to be teeth. Some people say yes, and then they backslide. You don't get multiple chances. But at the same time, there has to be something beyond just the enforcement piece to make sure that we serve the needs of those who are out here committing these crimes, to make sure that they don't either recidivate or, you know, just not change their mindset at all.
Where do you stand on the safe injection sites? Do you agree with having one in Kensington or another place in the city? And if so, where do you see the police role in that?
So I don't have an in-depth response for you on that, but what I shared when I was announced was that, you know, and I think this goes back to your question because I realized I didn't answer it completely, and I'm sorry. Some of these things, you know, substance abuse issues, some of the smaller petty crimes are driven by substance abuse, which is a health condition. And a lot of people will tell you, you know, if someone has issues with their kidneys, they go see a doctor for it. They're not arrested for it. something has to be done. We recognize that a lot of the lower level crimes are driven by substance abuse issues. Opioid use is a huge problem here in the city. And we also recognize that we're criminalizing individuals for something that in other places is seen as a medical issue. So with that said, again, I don't believe it should be something that's driven by the police department. But if that in fact comes into fruition, our role would not be to criminalize those who utilize these sites, but it's to make sure that the areas around whatever the sites would be are safe and secure, and to prevent the sale of illegal drugs or narcotics around the sites.
How many more do we have? So you get one more, I get one more? Okay. I just want to make sure.
This is the last one?
Okay.
We heard you guys whispering too, by the way.
That's what we thought. That's what we thought was going on.
5 more minutes good or no?
Yeah, can we 5 more minutes?
That would make it 20 minutes.
I'm with the African-American paper in town, and the African-American community was very invested in an African-American woman, a competent African-American woman. You are the first African-American woman, first word, to head this police force. Just talk about what that means to you on a personal level.
I recognize what that represents for a lot of people, including myself. There are little girls who look at me and say, oh, wow. And sometimes I listen to it with parents and they say, oh, she's the boss of all these cops. And then I see their eyes just get really big out of shock and surprise. And then you can see this admiration come over their face. And that's because, you know, we're not necessarily told, oh, when you grow up, you too can be a police officer. Although I've seen a lot of little girls in firefighter uniforms lately. No slight against the firefighters, but we're not raised thinking this is something that we too can be. And I recognize that me sitting in this seat, a lot of people look at me and say, you know, I too can do that. You can't be what you can't see. With that said, it's disheartening that we're still having the conversation about firsts in the 21st century, regardless of what I represent or, you know, which demographic I represent. There's so many others like me that all they need is a chance and an opportunity to take the seat, because we've been working behind the curtains for a very long time. We're more than capable. But then I would also say, too, that once we're in these positions, it's important to make sure that we're set up to succeed. We're often given the opportunity to be in a position of influence when things are at their worst. And then if things fail, someone has the ability to say, see, I told you so. And that's why I go out of my way to say, look, this isn't a one-person show. I'm more than capable. But no one person could achieve what we're asking for on their own. So again, I think it means a lot. I appreciate that it's inspiring for many. But at the same time, I think we need to come to the point to where this is normalized, to where we're no longer talking about everything from my hair to what I'm wearing to even nail polish, right? Because this is what makes us us. And if we say we value diversity, then it should be a no-brainer that we're allowing for things that make us us and make us the unique individuals that we are. So I'm honored. I'm actually really humbled by the honor. And I know I have a tough job ahead of me, but I also know I have a lot of support.
I think I know how to answer this one, but do you have a timeline set for when you want people to start seeing results, when you want to start seeing the homicide rate clearance become a better number, when you want to see less violent crimes on the street? I
mean, I would love for that. If I had a crystal ball, you know, I would love for that to be yesterday or before I even started. But these things take time. There, however, there's a very strong sense of urgency, and there are a lot of things that are already in the works before I'd even gotten here around the use of, like I said, the use of data, through the use of intelligence, through leveraging of partnerships and technology. That when they come into fruition, I think we'll start to see some really good gains. But in the meantime, you know, how do you ask for someone to be patient when in the meantime there are human beings that are losing their lives? You can't. But all I can do right now is do the best that I can and manage expectations and say, look, while I wish I had the answer overnight, I can just continue to encourage that passion and that energy that's out there in the community and amongst our partners to come to the table. Bring your solutions, work with us, and say, look, whatever it is that you know about this, whatever your suggestions are, you know, we have the law enforcement piece, but we're relying upon others to help us with what they think would curb some of the violence as well. And far too often we see individuals and groups working in silos, or they're not willing to work with the police. And I think we're at a point in time where we've reached a level of criticality where we can't be that way anymore. We have to come to the table, whether we've gotten along in the past. We have to agree to disagree, but we all come together towards the shared and common goal of wanting to stop this violence and curbing this violence. And I think our efforts are best used when we come together collaboratively to do that, and I think we can do it.
Have you talked with any of your sorority sisters in the area?
I have briefly, and that's the good thing about being a part of such a wonderful sisterhood, is that before I came here, I knew that I had a network that I can reach out to. You know, people ask me a lot of professional questions. Well, what are you going to do, you know, in the first 30, 60, 90 days? But, you know, there's also an adjustment that needs to be made personally, you know, in moving into a new place, a new environment, a new culture. And I appreciate the fact that they've made themselves available for that.
So
Hello, hello,
you found a
hello,
place now. You
hello.
found a place to live.